It was a cold morning in New York. The wind cut through the streets, whipping the faces of the few people who dared to venture out so early. The sky was overcast, a gray palette that seemed to weigh down on the city and its inhabitants. For Alex, it was just another day of trying to survive. At around 40 years old, Alex's appearance was marked by years of hardship. Worn-out clothes, a coat that barely kept out the cold, and eyes that had seen more than anyone deserved to witness. Before everything fell apart, he had a stable life. He was a construction worker, a family man, but the crisis and a severe accident left him disabled and, soon after, unemployed. He lost his home, his dignity, and little by little, even the friends who had promised to stick by him. That morning, Alex dragged himself along the deserted sidewalks, looking for something to eat. The smell of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread wafted from a nearby cafe, and he stopped, almost instinctively, near the trash can outside, where he sometimes found leftovers that were still good. He kneeled, ignoring the constant pain in his back, and began sifting through the garbage carefully. People passing by avoided eye contact, pretending not to notice. It was always like that. Alex had become used to being invisible, but today, something unusual caught his attention. Pushed up against the trash can, there was a black leather suitcase. It was large, seemed new, and was sitting there alone, as if it had been forgotten. Alex furrowed his brow, curiosity mixing with caution. He looked around, but no one seemed to be searching for the suitcase. With a mix of hesitation and hope, he pulled it closer. His hands trembled as he unzipped the bag. Inside, he saw something that took his breath away. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, tied together in neat bundles. His heart raced. The amount was enormous, enough to change his life forever. He could finally get back on his feet, have a roof over his head, a second chance. But as he stared at the money, something inside Alex made him hesitate. He felt a weight in his chest, a voice inside reminding him of everything he had lost. He knew what it was like to lose something precious, to feel the pain of lack and need. This suitcase had an owner, someone who, for some reason, might be desperately searching for it. He closed the suitcase and took a deep breath. His decision was made. With the suitcase clutched in his trembling hands, Alex stood up slowly, still feeling the weight of his choice. The temptation to keep the money was almost irresistible. After all, it was hard not to imagine how his life could change with all that money. A simple apartment, clean clothes, decent food, maybe even a chance to regain some dignity. But Alex wasn't the kind of man who lived at the expense of someone else's misfortune, even in his darkest moments. Crossing the busy streets, he tried to ignore the suspicious looks from pedestrians and drivers. His worn-out coat and scruffy beard made every move seem suspicious, especially while carrying such an elegant suitcase. He knew that if he walked into any bank or upscale building looking like this, he'd be kicked out before he could even say a word. Alex then had an idea. He decided to head to the city's public library. The staff knew him there. Some even greeted him from time to time without judgment. It was a place where, for brief moments, he felt like he was still part of society. The library would be the first step in trying to find the owner of the money. The walk there wasn't easy. His torn shoes let the cold seep in, and he moved slowly, still shaken by his discovery. But finally, he reached the familiar building, its glass doors opening to the warm air that enveloped him as soon as he stepped inside. "Good morning, Alex," said one of the librarians, a gray-haired woman named Evelyn, who always treated him with respect. Her eyes narrowed as she saw the suitcase he was carrying, but she didn't ask any questions. "Need anything today?" Alex nodded, carefully placing the suitcase on the floor. He didn't want to draw any more attention than he already was. "I need to use the computer, Evelyn." "It's urgent," he replied, his voice firm but marked by anxiety. Evelyn picked up on the serious tone. and led him to one of the available workstations. Sitting down at the computer, Alex took a deep breath and started typing. He needed to find out who Richard Parker was, the name he had found on a boarding pass hidden in the suitcase's pocket. The internet gave him an immediate answer. Richard Parker was a millionaire businessman, the owner of one of the biggest tech companies in the city. A man whose face graced business magazines, but to Alex, he was just a distant and unreachable figure. The boarding pass showed a recent flight, meaning the money had likely been lost not long ago. Alex closed his eyes for a moment, trying to imagine this man's life. Maybe Richard Parker didn't even know yet that his suitcase was missing. Or maybe he was in complete desperation, trying to track it down. It has to be the right thing to do, Alex muttered to himself, reaffirming his decision. He stood up, thanking Evelyn, who was still watching him with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Are you going to be okay, Alex?" she asked, noticing the weight in his expression. He forced a smile, though he didn't feel lighthearted. "I'm trying," he answered, "but I have to do this." With the suitcase of money in hand and Richard Parker's name as his clue, Alex set off in search of an answer that, he hoped, would bring not only peace to his conscience, but perhaps a new chance at life. Alex left the library with the suitcase tightly clutched in his hands, now with a clear destination in mind. The headquarters of Parker Enterprises, the massive glass tower that stood out on the city's skyline. He had never entered such an imposing building, but he knew he had to keep moving forward. The weight of the suitcase wasn't just physical. The responsibility he felt grew with every step. The walk seemed endless, and the biting cold didn't help. He remembered a time when he had a job, a home to warm him, a family that loved him. Life had a cruel way of bringing someone down, and he knew that better than anyone. But even with everything he had lost, there was still one thing he refused to let the world take from him: his honesty. As he approached the gleaming Parker Enterprises building, Alex could feel the palpable difference between the world of the wealthy and his own. Well-dressed men and women hurried in and out, cell phones in hand, their expressions serious. When he stepped into the lobby, he was immediately noticed. His unkempt hair and worn-out coat didn't fit the luxurious surroundings, and the receptionist behind the desk looked at him with a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her smile professional, though her eyes betrayed concern that he might be there to cause trouble. Alex approached slowly. He held the suitcase carefully, knowing he needed to choose his words wisely. "I need to speak with Mr. Richard Parker. It's extremely important," he said, his voice firm despite the nervousness. The receptionist raised an eyebrow, clearly doubting that someone like Alex could have anything relevant to discuss with one of the city's most influential men. "Mr. Parker is in a meeting," she replied, already starting to type something into the computer, likely preparing to call security. "But if you'd like, I can take a message." "No," Alex interrupted, urgency in his voice. He knew that if they sent him away, he'd never get another chance to speak with Richard Parker. "Please, you need to understand. I found something that belongs to him. Something he's going to want back." The receptionist hesitated. She looked at the suitcase Alex was holding, a look of doubt crossing her face. Alex's desperation was clear, but there was something genuine in his eyes that made her pause for a moment. She glanced around as if looking for instructions. "Please wait here," she said, standing up and disappearing through a door behind the desk. Alex stood in the lobby, feeling the weight of the curious and suspicious glances from the people around him. He was used to being invisible, but now, suddenly, he was the center of attention. Sweat started to bead on his forehead despite the cold as he waited. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the door opened again, and a tall, sturdy man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out. His gaze was cold, sizing Alex up from head to toe. "My name's David, Mr. Parker's personal assistant," the man said in a deep voice. "Follow me." Alex swallowed hard but nodded, following David to an elevator that took them up to one of the building's upper floors. The glass walls offered an impressive view of the city, but Alex barely noticed. His mind was focused on what was to come. Finally, he was led into a spacious, luxurious office where Richard Parker, a distinguished man with graying hair and an intense gaze, was standing, waiting. He seemed impatient, as though he had more important things to do. "You've got 5 minutes of my time," Richard said, crossing his arms. "What's so important?" Alex took a deep breath. He placed the suitcase on the glass desk, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. "I found this on the street," Alex said, opening the suitcase and revealing the money inside. "And I believe it's yours." The silence in the office was almost deafening. Richard Parker looked at the fortune in front of him. Then his eyes turned to Alex, filled with disbelief and something else that Alex couldn't quite identify. Richard Parker remained silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the suitcase full of money. The shine of the bills contrasted with the darkness that seemed to run through his gaze as he tried to process what was happening. It was clear that he hadn't expected someone like Alex, clearly homeless and worn by life, to walk into his office with such a large sum of money, and, even more surprising, to be returning it. He slowly approached the desk, his footsteps echoing through the vast space. David, standing nearby, seemed equally stunned, his eyes wide and taking in every detail. "You found this on the street?" Richard asked, his voice deliberately controlled but still tinged with a hint of disbelief. Alex nodded, the nervousness finally beginning to show in his movements. He struggled to maintain his composure, though every instinct told him to disappear. Everything felt so surreal. "Yes, sir. It was near a cafe, by a trash can. I could have kept the money, but it wouldn't have been right," Alex replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He paused, searching for the right words. "I know what it's like to lose everything. And I know this money belongs to you." Richard studied Alex for a moment, his piercing gaze seeming to look beyond the worn-out appearance of the man before him. Finally, he exhaled slowly, as if releasing a weight he hadn't known he was carrying. "Do you know how much money is here?" Richard asked, a hint of incredulity in his voice. Alex shook his head, swallowing hard. "No, sir, but I know it's enough to change someone's life. Someone like me. Still, I couldn't live with myself knowing I took something that didn't belong to me." Silence fell again in the room, but this time, it felt different. Richard moved away from the desk and walked over to the window, looking out at the city stretching below. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost reflective. "You know, most people wouldn't have hesitated to take that suitcase and disappear," he said, not turning around. "Especially someone in your situation." Alex felt the weight of those words, but he didn't respond. He knew that what he had done was something few would understand, and maybe that was enough. Richard finally turned to face him, his eyes now softer, almost impressed. "You've done something most people would never do," Richard said, crossing his arms. "But tell me why. You clearly need help. What made you decide to bring this suitcase back?" Alex took a deep breath, feeling tears threatening to fill his eyes. He fought to hold back the emotion, but it was hard. "Because even with everything I've lost, I still have my dignity," he said, his voice cracking. "My mom always taught me that honesty is worth more than any amount of money. And if I lose that, then there's nothing left of me." A heavy silence fell over the room, but this time, there was something transformative about it. Richard Parker stood there, staring at Alex as if he was truly seeing him for the first time. Something shifted on his face, a mix of surprise and respect. After a moment, Richard slowly walked over to Alex and extended his hand. "You're a rare man, Alex, and I believe the world needs more people like you." Alex shook Richard's hand, feeling for the first time in a long while that he was a person worthy of respect. He didn't know what would come next, but in that moment, he knew his honesty had made a difference. Richard released Alex's hand and glanced again at the suitcase full of money. A reflective silence hung in the air as the millionaire seemed to consider everything that had just happened. Then, he returned to his seat behind the glass desk, but this time with a determined look on his face. "Alex, your honesty is something I rarely find, even among people who live surrounded by privilege," Richard began, his voice softer. "I built this empire believing wealth was the greatest measure of success. But you've shown me that integrity is worth much more." Alex braced himself for any response, even if it was just a thank you, and being sent out of the building with his head held high. But Richard had something different in mind. He opened a drawer and pulled out a check, filling it out as he spoke. "Most people see money as the solution to all their problems," Richard said. "But I see that you view the world in a way few others do. And because of that, I want this money to be a new beginning for you. Not a reward for your honesty, but an opportunity to transform your life." Richard pushed the check toward Alex. When the homeless man looked at it, his heart nearly stopped. The amount was more money than he could have ever imagined. "And that's not all," Richard said firmly. "I see in you something most people here don't have: integrity. And that's exactly the kind of character we need in our company. If you're willing, I'd like to offer you a job at Parker Enterprises. Something that can help you rebuild your life with dignity, using your skills and honesty to make a real difference." Alex was speechless. The check was already more than he could have ever hoped for, but the job offer was a chance to rebuild his life with stability and purpose. He felt tears streaming down his face, but this time, he didn't try to stop them. It was as if a wave of hope and relief had finally engulfed him. I don't know what to say, Mr. Parker," Alex said, his voice choked. "I accept with all my heart. Thank you for believing in me." Richard smiled, a rare warmth spreading across his face. "Don't thank me. You've earned this with your honesty. Now, show the world what you can do with a second chance." As Alex left the office, accompanied by David to take care of the details, he felt like a new chapter was opening in his life. That glass tower, which had once seemed so unreachable, now symbolized a future full of possibilities. Alex's act of honesty brought about an unexpected transformation, proving that integrity and character can be rewarded in extraordinary ways. Even in the most difficult of circumstances, doing the right thing can open doors that once seemed impossible to reach. It's not just money that defines a person's success, but the opportunities they seize with honor and determination. Now with a job at Parker Enterprises, Alex knew his journey was just beginning, but he was ready to face the future with his head held high, grateful for having stayed true to the values his mother had taught him.